Zach is back. It's the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
All right, welcome back in. 4:19 is the time in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios. March Madness is here. Princeton going back to the NCAA tournament. Villanova looking to defend their crown, and we'll see who Cassara thinks is going to be cutting down the nets in Arizona coming up later in the month. And now joining us is the great coach Cassara on the Zach Gelb Show. Coach, appreciate the time. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
Well, I appreciate that introduction. I don't know how great a coach I was, but I'm certainly happy to be on with you guys.
I'm going to be nice to you, if you're coming on the show. But Coach Cassara with us right now on the Zach Gelb Show. You know how tough it is to coach at the NCAA Division I level. The job Mitch Henderson has done this year with Princeton after losing two senior players, starting out 4-6, and then to win 19 in a row and win the Ivy outright going undefeated. How about the coaching job this year of Mitch Henderson?
Masterful job. I got to know Mitch a little bit. We came in at the same time. I was at Hofstra and he was at Princeton, and he has really done a wonderful job. A little bit of down cycle for them the last year or so, but then they've really come back strong, and he's got a great nucleus. And hey, I think they deserve a lot of credit for winning that first game at Penn. I mean, that was a game that Penn really kind of had. They were a little tight, found a way to win the game, and then obviously get themselves in the dance and go undefeated in the league. So he's just done a wonderful job.
Those first games of the conference tournament, especially when you are the top dog, could always be a little bit tricky because sometimes your players could be looking ahead. And I'm not saying that's what Princeton was doing, because that Penn team, Steve Donahue, really did coach them up well in that game, and they got a fortuitous break on the putback by Miles Stevens, and then they beat Yale yesterday to go to the NCAA tournament. But you have this Ivy League tournament. It was the inaugural one. Your impressions on the Ivy introducing the Ivy League tournament to their conference?
I love it. I thought it brought a lot of attention to what's really a great conference and really good teams. And I think anytime you're displaying the palestra and the history there, I think it's just great. And like you mentioned, that first game is always tough, especially when the bullseye's kind of on your back and they're essentially playing a road game against Penn in the palestra. So very difficult challenge for them. And you could tell they were a little tight, and then it got tight at the end. They got a little lucky. But, I think sometimes this time of year you have to be good, which they are. And then you just have to be a little lucky. You have to play well at the right time, get the right bounce, and they did that. And, now they've put themselves in position to be a really dangerous team in the tournament.
Over the years, we've seen some improbable runs in the NCAA tournament. George Mason with Jim Larinaga, everyone points to. Then the Butler's teams with Brad Stevens. And then you've had some 15 seeds go and advance pretty far. But Coach Cassara joining us right now. This is a 12-5 game between Notre Dame and Princeton. If Princeton's going to pull the upset, the 5-12 upset, what are they going to have to specifically do up against a very good Notre Dame team that knows what it's like to advance in this NCAA tournament?
Notre Dame's a tricky team. I mean, they're a team that can really shoot the ball. They can score in bunches. They have difficult matchups. But I think Princeton actually matches up well because they can put a lot of guys in the perimeter. They have some versatile guys. So I think the matchup is really good. I think the key for Princeton is obviously going to be shooting the ball well, number one, and then defending that three-point line against Notre Dame. They've got some tough matchups, especially with a guy like Bonzie Colson.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're going to have to hit the shots from the outside perimeter. But that defense right now for Princeton, up against Yale in the final 8 minutes, Yale didn't have a field goal. That defense right now, it's just stifling, Coach.
Really good. I think Mitch deserves a lot of credit. So much is always made of the Princeton offense and what they can do and how they play. But what he's really done is has a group now that plays team defense. They guard the ball. They guard the perimeter. They've got some athleticism. They've got all the pieces. And, as I mentioned, your first question, he's just done a masterful job. He deserves a lot of credit.
This Notre Dame team, they've been on these runs in these NCAA tournaments the last 2 years, and they've got that stop right in the Elite Eight, losing to UNC last year in Philadelphia and then Kentucky the year before that. That experience from Notre Dame, you expect a hungry team. How about that experience and how it factors in to this game to start that quest coming up on Thursday?
Going into the tournament, I love teams that have two things. Number one is experience, as you just mentioned, and then number two, teams that are playing well. I think those things really help you as you go into the tournament, and Notre Dame has both of those things. Getting to the ACC final, playing against maybe the hottest team in the country in Duke. So they've got all those things. They've got some experience. They've got some seniors. They've got some depth. They've got some matchup nightmares. I think they're really a difficult guard. I think Princeton will give them everything they've got. I love that matchup. It's going to be a really interesting game to watch. But, you got to win that first game in the tournament, and then anything can happen. And Notre Dame's the type of team, if they get by Princeton, you could very well see them in the Final Four.
Coach, let's get to Villanova. Jay Wright, we talk about really good coaching jobs. I don't think there's a hotter coach in the country than Jay Wright. You win a national championship and then are the #1 overall seed. It was a few years ago, people were complaining about Jay Wright. It seems like forever ago, but now Jay Wright really has this Wildcats team in a great spot.
He's on the top of the mountain now. There's no question about that. I mean, what he's done, and listen, the Big East got a lot of respect by the committee. I mean, what they did across the board through their league, really impressive. So I think it even makes what Villanova did winning even more impressive because they had to play so many quality teams in their conference. They now have experience. They have, Jay Wright. They've got guys who have been there, been in the big dance. And I think the one question for them is depth. They don't play a ton of guys, so that will be resting. And I think they have a very, very tricky game in that second round. I really like Wisconsin. I know they've been up and down. If Wisconsin gets by Virginia Tech, that's going to be a really tricky game for Villanova.
Other than Wisconsin, let's say if Virginia Tech's able to win, you look at that East Regional, which is a tough bracket, to say the least, then this is a matchup that everyone's going to want to see in Madison Square Garden, Villanova and Duke. Who are some other teams in that East bracket that could possibly impede a Duke-Villanova matchup?
I don't think there's many, to be honest with you. I think we're headed for a Duke-Villanova final in Madison Square Garden, which would make all the networks really, really happy, and I think all the fans too. I mean, it wouldn't be much bigger than that. Krzyzewski, Jay Wright, Madison Square Garden to go to the Final Four. I mean, you can't script it any better than that.
How do you view SMU and the job they've done being 30-4 this year?
Yeah, that would be the one team. I think that they don't probably get enough recognition. They seem to just steamroll through. Coach Jankovic has just done a wonderful job. I think people keep wondering, are they really that good? Are they really that good? But they just keep winning. So maybe they're a little better than the national media thinks they are, and probably the average fan thinks they are. So the Ponies are one group that I wouldn't rule out. Again, they have a little bit of an issue with depth. They don't play a lot of guys, but they're a very versatile group. They really play almost positionless. They have guys that can play multiple positions. So they're a tough out as well.
Their conference, the American, it's always so different each and every year. Last year, they get the respect in the NCAA tournament and then didn't back it up when they got to the big dance. And then this year, it seems like they didn't get as much respect. What can the American do to improve that respect a little bit from here on out?
Well, I think I think it's really simple. UConn has to be better. I think UConn has a national name, a national brand. If UConn's not good in the American, I think the conference really drops, and you can see that right now. I mean, we haven't had a lot of tournaments in years past where Syracuse and UConn are out on the outside looking in.
Since you mentioned Syracuse, some people have a gripe that they didn't get into the NCAA tournament. I'm fine with keeping them out at 18-14 overall on the record. From the committee perspective, how do you grade the job that they did in this year's bracket?
I think it was okay. I mean, I think there's always gripes. I actually feel that Syracuse should have been in. But I look at it a little differently, I think, than some people on the committee. I really value teams that have won big games as opposed to losing bad games. And I've felt that way throughout my career. So I think they're the type of team, if they were in, it wouldn't have surprised anybody if they were in the Sweet 16 because they have the ability to beat anybody on their schedule. They do have some bad losses. I like what they did. I thought they should have been in. Again, they beat Wake Forest, finished ahead of Wake Forest. I struggle with that one with Wake getting in. But the only other thing I would say about the committee is there's a couple teams that I just felt were seated way too low. I mean, how is Wichita State seated where they are? I don't see that. And I think like for a team like Dayton, who's had a fabulous year, they have a brutal first game.
Yeah, the seeding's the only thing I think people could have like a legitimate point for. And the Syracuse thing, it could go either way. Like you said, multiple people are going to have different opinions. Just going back with Syracuse, though, if I was making the argument for Syracuse, you mentioned those top 50 wins. Like last year, the committee put such an emphasis on top 50, and then they don't this year. Is that just continue inconsistency with the committee and the message that they just try to spin each and every year?
I think that's the one gripe, and I think you heard Jim Boeheim say that yesterday, and some of his comments I was even reading today is, you feel like you do one thing, and then all of a sudden the next year the committee's talking about, switching, and the committee says they look at things the same, but I feel like year to year it does vary sometimes, and that's what will continue to have a lot of people really frustrated, and obviously teams on the outside looking in are quite frustrated.
Coach, this Villanova team, getting back to them, we know what they did last year, winning that shot, which was just unbelievable by Chris Jenkins. This year, though, they had a better regular season this year than they did last year, only having 3 losses. Is it safe to say this year's Villanova team better than last year's?
I think you would have to say, because now, they have depth. They have depth and they have experience, because they've been there before now. They lost some key pieces from that team last year. They've replaced some, but, they have Jay Wright. They have experience. They're the defending champs. They've been in big games. They've been in pressure moments. So I think this team, you would have to argue, is arguably better.
Before we let Coach Mo Cassara run, now doing some fantastic work with CBS Sports. Potential upsets in the first round. I know you mentioned a few already, but give me a few more that you like.
I think it's about matchups, too. One team I really like is UNC Wilmington. I think they got a really tough draw with Virginia, but I think that's one. Another team I really like a lot, Middle Tennessee State. I think they're really, really good. They're the type of team that could win a couple games. Another kind of, maybe off the charts team that I like a little bit is Winthrop. I think they could win a first-round game. So look for there to be some really stunning games starting on Thursday.
Let me throw you one more potential upset game, and let me hear your thoughts on this one. Florida State and Florida Gulf Coast. What do you like on this one?
Everybody loves Florida Gulf Coast. I actually like Florida State. I think Florida State's a little better than people think they are. They kind of hung in the top of the ACC all year. For some reason, they seem to fizzle a little bit down the stretch. Florida Gulf Coast is certainly the sexy pick right now, and some people think they're a Sweet 16 type of team, and they very well may be. But that's a great game in Florida. Two Florida teams. It's going to be exciting.
Before we let Coach Mo Cassara run, give me your Final Four, and who do you have cutting down the nets in Arizona?
Ooh, tough one. I'm going with North Carolina. I think they have the most complete team. I like their path to the Final Four, so I'm going to go with North Carolina in that region. I like Kansas, mostly because they're playing really in their backyard all the way up to the Final Four. They're going to have their fan base there. They're going to have their full team, and I think sometimes losing when they did rest their legs a little bit. I like Kansas and Carolina on that side. On the other side, I like Arizona. I think they're one of the hotter teams in the country right now. I like them to beat Gonzaga in the final. And then the other side, the Villanova-Duke matchup we mentioned and talked about. I've gone back and forth, but I'm going to go with Villanova and Jay Wright. It's just hard to root against them, but I like Carolina to cut the nets down.
Is a lot of that just because of the redemption from last year getting so close?
I think that's a little bit of it, but I just, watching them throughout the year, I feel like they have the pieces. I feel like they have multiple options, and I think if they can get, a little bit of momentum going in this tournament, I just think they have the right makeup and the depth to really make a run. And hey, as you know, they could also lose in the second game.
Yeah, last year I picked Michigan State to go all the way. They lost the first game. It wasn't good for my bracket.
That's what makes it so fun. That's what makes it really entertaining. And year in and year out, I still struggle to find ways to make the right picks, and I usually don't do them right because I go with my heart and coaches and guys I know, but it's going to be exciting for sure.
Last one for you, Coach. I just want to get this from a coaching perspective out of you. Arizona taking that timeout against UCLA. I know Coach Miller was doing it because he wasn't happy when UCLA did it a few games ago. What did you think about that, which developed over the weekend?
That's a tough one, and I've been in those. I've been on both sides of those type of things in games, and coaches sometimes make decisions, and I think there's certainly a heated rivalry there. I actually know Sean Miller really well. What a competitive guy! He was a great player. Talk about two great coaches. They were also two great players. Steve Alford and Sean Miller, great players, heated guys, competitive guys. I'm going to leave it right there. Just two competitive guys. Coaching basketball and giving everything they got.
I was waiting for a little John Chaney and a Calipari moment between Miller. Yeah, I really was. I'll kill you. I was waiting for one of those moments, Coach.
Yeah, John Chaney, that era seems to be gone a little bit. So there'll be more made of it now in the media and the social media and stuff like that. And that's just the nature of the game. But I actually really like UCLA, too. I think they're a dangerous team, especially with what they can do offensively.
Well, whether you think you're a great coach or not, Coach, I'll tell you, you're a great analyst now. We appreciate the time.
Well, very average at best as a coach. I'm doing the best I can to get above that as an analyst.
Thanks so much. There's Coach Mo Cassara on the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. Yeah, he's right. He was not a great coach. He was not a great head coach. Get to a job in the NCAA Division I and be a head coach. You got to be doing something right, but I did slip up there, I will admit. I can't put him in the great coaching categories, but he's a really good analyst. Guy delivers good insight as well, and that's what you have. Locally, here are the two big stories right now. You got Princeton and their win streak. Can they play a little Cinderella darling going up against a Notre Dame team that has been to back-to-back Elite Eights in 2015 where they lost to Kentucky, and then 2016 where they lost to the eventual runner-up in North Carolina, and then you have the big-time favorite in Villanova, number 1 seed in that East region. And this is an East region. You have Villanova, Wisconsin, Virginia, Florida, SMU, Baylor, South Carolina, and Duke. So you got some really good teams there, but I feel like we're just on a collision course to get Villanova and Duke. And you look around the rest of the bracket. We'll go more in depth on the bracket later on in the show. We'll fill it out tomorrow together. Actually, we'll fill out the entire bracket. I always never understand now how to fill out the bracket because you got these playing games, and sometimes these playing game teams, they go on a little bit of a run. But we'll see if that happens this year, and we'll try to do it to the best of our abilities and filling out the bracket tomorrow on the show.